Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to the Department of International Relations. I, on behalf of my department, welcome the esteemed guests who have managed to come to Pakistan, and they will be sharing their great views about some issues of great importance and relevance to not just Pakistan but to humanity too. Before we move forward, I would like to introduce the guests that are with us. We have Judith Bello. Judith Bello is an active member of Fellowship of Reconciliation, the Upstate Coalition to Ground the Drones and End the Wars, and the United National Anti-War Coalition. She was on the street protesting the Vietnam War in Washington DC in 1969 and has been protesting the US wars on the Greater Middle East since 2001. She spent a month in northern Iraq in 2009 and participated in 2 Fellowship of Reconciliation peace delegations to Iraq. Her blog is Towards a Global Perspective. We welcome Judith Bello here. Our another guest is Joe Lombardo, Delaware, New York. Joe Lombardo is the co-coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition, a major U.S. anti-war coalition. He is a retired New York State worker and union activist. He is a member of the Retirees Local of the Civil Service Employees Association and a member of the Tory Area Labour Council. He is a founding member of the Muslim Solidarity Committee and Project Salam. During the Vietnam War, he served as a staff person for the National Peace Action Coalition. We also welcome you. We would also like to welcome Dr Aafia Siddiqui, a sister of Dr Aafia Siddiqui, who has been under US imprisonment. And now I would request the Chairperson, Department of International Relations, Dr Shaista Tabassum, to join us here and to share her views.
Respected Chairman Joe Lombardo, Dr Siddiqui and Dr Aafia Siddiqui, dear students and the guests who are coming along with me are very good friends. On behalf of the Department of International Relations, the students and faculty are welcome you all, and especially our American respected guests to this small and limited discussion on US-Pakistan relations. This is an academic discussion which we have organized, and the basic purpose is to highlight 2 areas of the relationship, that is the drone attack and the imprisonment of Dr Aafia Siddiqui in US-American jail. As a student of international relations, we are very much aware that Pakistan-US relations have gone through different upheavals. 1950s, 1960s. 1950, Pakistan entered into Defense Pact and paid a lot to that due to the closer relationship with the United States. And in 1960s and 70s, the relationship got cordial, but in the mid of 1970s, there was a gap in the relationship, and the distance started to develop because of US sanctions on Pakistan due to mainly 2 reasons: the military government and Pakistan's policy of nuclearization. Pakistan goes to the nuclear program. But there were 2 major developments in the entire history. One is the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan in 1980 and the US attack on Afghanistan after 9/11. That had changed the entire nomenclature of the relationship. 70s we were facing sanctions, but ultimately we came very close to the United States because of the American interest in the region. And Pakistan, as we all know, that paid a lot in the form of clashing of culture, violation of the domestic laws, and the large number of the Afghan refugees in Pakistan. And that had been compensated in the form of huge amounts of economic aid. But later on in later 1980s, when the US interest ended in Pakistan, then Pakistan again faced sanctions and restrictions from the US. But I think that the worst part of the relationship started after 9/11, when Pakistan accepted to become part of the war on terrorism, war against terrorism that had ultimately transformed into war of terrorism. The war started in Afghanistan, but gradually it reached the borders of Pakistan and then entered into Pakistan. And now we are faced with, we are here at it's a closed area. We don't know where we'll go. And we are facing very difficult situation because of the drone attacks. The attacks were on the criminals or the terrorists, whatever the definition could be. But the innocent people, they were also affected, and nearly, I don't exactly know that how many people were killed because of the drone attack. It must have been, because the government figure says this much, Americans say this much, but the journalists and the media people, they say that the number of the casualties and the victims of the drone attacks are much, much larger, as that has been reported in the media and the American official spokesman. The question always asked is that why there is a need of the drone attacks? Why United States adopted such policy of attacking its own ally, the non-NATO ally, which had been supporting the war at different fronts. I mean, it's not only the military front, but Pakistan is facing economic, social, political, all types of problems because of this war in Afghanistan, which is not our war, which has been taking pause on us, and we are in a state of flux. We don't know where to go, whom to address, and how to end this problem. This is not the only issue, that is, drone attack is not the only problem, but there is another very sensitive and very controversial area, that is the arrest and the punishment, imprisonment of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, a Pakistani scientist that had been arrested from a third state. And since we are very much in, we know that how the state laws are applied, how the law is applicable in a third state, Afghanistan, and then to a foreigner, and then taken to United States and prison and trial and then ultimately prison for such a long period, means 80 years. So there are 86 years. So how could the law of the land be applicable to those people who are? So there are a number of the questions, there are a number of issues which are still unanswered and which requires to be answered. And I expect our respected guests that they will be addressing these issues. And I think that this is a very, very encouraging, very positive and extremely important initiative which they have taken. This is, I think, the work of the American civil society, which I don't want to use the word, but we felt that it's no more there. But I think that because of their presence, because of their participation in the drone attack, anti-drone attack war, we believe that the American civil society is now sharing and they are entering into what we want, that our war, this is not our war and it should end. And in fact, that requires to be appreciated and it requires to be supported at every level. I hope that the students will benefit from your experiences and your initiatives. And I think that if you put some light on this particular issues as well as your own experiences. Thank you very much.
Mr. Joe Lombardo to please join us and share his views.
I'm here until very recently, so a lot of what you hear is going to come from the top of my head. I'm sorry that I can't address you in your own language, but you all seem to do much better in English than I would do in Arabic. We came with a delegation of 31 people who are anti-war leaders in the United States and activists, anti-war activists in the United States, to Pakistan to try to go to the north part of the country, to Waziristan, to where the drones have been hitting, in act of solidarity with the people of that region, and to show that the American people stand with the Pakistani people, even the people in the tribal areas, in wanting peace and wanting an end to these drone attacks. And when we show that, the question gets focused very clearly. If the Pakistani people, people in the tribal areas, if the American people want peace, why do we have war and why do we have drone attacks? And the focus is right at the problem, which is the U.S. government. By coming here, we know that we've gotten a lot of media in Pakistan. We've gotten a lot of media in the United States. And we've gotten media all around the world. And so whatever happened, even though we were blocked at the border from going across, our mission was accomplished. Because people now know, have seen this act of solidarity, and this will be a boost to our anti-war movement. We've met many people, many organizations, and many individuals in this country that we now have contacts with, that we will be working together, and together I think we can make a difference in ending these wars. Now, the American people are, in the latest polls, about 70% against the war in Afghanistan. So when you see my country waging war in Afghanistan, no, it's not the wishes of the American people. It's the wishes of our government, which do not represent the interests of the American people. The anti-war movement in the United States today is different than when I started organizing against the war. I started a long time ago during the Vietnam War. And we were very, very successful. In the beginning of the anti-Vietnam War movement, there was only 8% of the United States that was against the war. Towards the end, it was 88%. We were able to make that change. And when we made that change in the population of the United States, it also made a change in the soldiers that were fighting. Because they are from the population. Most of them were drafted into the army. They did not ask to go. They came from communities where 88% was against the war. 88% of their friends, their girlfriends, their families were against the war. So they, towards the end of that war, went to Vietnam with an anti-war position. And they stopped being an army. When they were asked to go and fight, they would question their orders. They would get together and discuss it. Sometimes they'd say to their officers, you want to go take that hill? You go take that hill. And then there was a policy, which I don't advocate, but have been called fragging, where the commanders and the officers would lead, and the soldiers would kill the officers. And soon became not a fighting force, and with the overwhelming opposition in the United States, and with the heroic resistance of the Vietnamese people, they had to leave Vietnam. We hope to do the same kind of thing with the wars now, but the wars are different. We first saw the war in Iraq, and people in the United States did not understand why we were going into Iraq. We first saw Afghanistan. Then we saw the war in Iraq. People did not understand why we were in Iraq. What did that have to do with 9/11? It was a secular government. Al-Qaeda didn't like Saddam Hussein very much. It had nothing to do with what happened at the World Trade Center. And I think it indicated clearly to a lot of people in our country and around the world that these wars had nothing to do with 9/11. They had to do with other political and geopolitical interests of the United States. The United States has changed in the past decades. Our economy has become greatly globalized. Huge amounts of capital have left the United States and invested in other countries. Through economic and political pressures, we've forced privatization of many things in countries all around the world, water systems, healthcare systems, and so forth, so that the money that was invested from the United States could make a profit for people in the United States. But at the same time, it hurt people in all these other countries. And so there was resistance, and there was war. And so the United States today has military in 120 countries around the world. The greatest empire ever. There's never been an empire that has had a military in 120 countries around the world. But it is to protect those interests. Not just capital went out of the United States, but all industries, strategic industries. The United States doesn't really have a steel industry anymore. It doesn't have paper industry, rubber industry, clothing industry. It still has an automobile industry, but most of those parts are made in other parts of the world. So the United States sees today the U.S. government and the 1%, as the Occupy movement, one country started calling it, sees the whole world as its own. It acts that way. And so we saw Afghanistan, we saw Iraq, we saw Libya, we're now seeing threats at Syria, we're seeing threats at Iran, we have drones that are flying, and, drones are an act of war. We're not at war with Afghanistan. We have no with Pakistan. We have no declared war with Pakistan. But we are bombing your country. We are violating the United States government. Not we. I have nothing to do with it. Are violating your territorial integrity. That should not be allowed. And your government should not allow. We have drones in other countries. In Yemen, Somalia, Sudan. Really in a number of other places. We even have drones flying in the United States. Not necessarily drones that are armed with bombs and weapons, but drones that are spying on our borders, stopping Mexicans that are coming across, and so forth, which also is another part of the whole globalization policy. With Mexico and other areas, we've made these treaties, NAFTA and GATT and so forth, that they're called, and which it puts U.S. industries in direct competition with industries in some of these underdeveloped countries. And so U.S. corporate farmers, for instance, are in competition with small farmers in Mexico. And the small farms then in Mexico fail. And it brings thousands of people into the cities and around the cities looking for work. But there is no work. So they come across the U.S. border looking for work. And U.S. border patrols try to stop them. This is another kind of war. There are many kinds of wars that we're doing at this point. And there's another kind of war that's going on. We in the anti-war movement in the United States talk about the wars abroad, which are these wars I talked about, and the wars at home. What are the wars at home in the United States? Well, the wars that are going on abroad are affecting in many, many different ways the people in the United States. One way is economic. About 59% of the U.S. budget, discretionary budget, is for military. The U.S. military budget is about as much as the rest of the world's military budget combined. So it's about as much as China and Russia and Europe and all the rest of the world combined. It's a tremendous amount of money, but it means it depletes money from other necessary human needs in the United States, from education, from health care, many, many areas. People are suffering because the capital from the richest country in the world is not there to support their needs. Instead, it goes to war. But there's another piece. Since 9/11 in the United States, we've had this whole security atmosphere in the United States. And the security atmosphere has hit more and more people. It started with the Muslims in the United States. Islam is a small minority of the population in the United States. It's made up of Afro-Americans who are native to the United States, most of whom have converted to Islam, and many of them out of anger and frustration with what the society has done to them, and saw Islam as an alternative to some of the traditional religions and traditional beliefs that happened, so they moved towards that direction. And the other part of the Muslim population in the United States are people from other countries who have come to the United States. Many Southeast Asians, many Pakistanis, many people from India, Bangladesh, and other areas. And so the U.S. government, as a way of built up this idea and this fear of Muslims, that Muslims are somehow different than other Americans, and Muslims are terrorists. And so they would send FBI agents into mosques to try to trick people. I could go into this for a long time, but we don't have time. Organizations which the anti-war movement helped set up, like Project Salam, Muslim Solidarity Committee, and so forth, has documented all these cases. We have a huge wall of people's names. Aafia Siddiqui falls into this case. She was not an American Muslim, but she was a Muslim. And she is now arrested in the United States. When we started fighting against the attacks on Muslims in the United States, we used the saying that happened in Germany during World War II when they came for the Jews. The saying went like this. It was by a minister from Germany. He said, first they came for the communists, and I said nothing because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I said nothing because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to say anything. So when I used to speak in anti-war platforms in the United States, I would say, first they came for the Muslims. And so we stood with our Muslim brothers and sisters, and we fought back, and it stops there. But it didn't. The next, they came for anti-war activists. And 24 members of my coalition, the United National Anti-War Coalition, have had their homes raided, have been given subpoenas to appear before a national, before federal courts, and were fighting for those cases. And then they came for the occupiers. When the Occupy movement started in the United States, they came for them. I didn't talk much about Aafia Siddiqui. I'm going to leave that to Judy, because I think, and of course to her sister, because I've gone on too long. But thank you for listening to me.
Bello to share her experiences with us.
For inviting us here to speak with you. I'd like to say something a little bit empowering at this point. Joe talked a lot about problems with our government, and I know that over the same period of time, your government has not been very responsive at some times either. And I think that's why the people of our nation, of all nations, need to communicate outside of the government so that we can speak to one another as individuals, as human beings. So I came here with the Codepink delegation to basically go to North Waziristan and to tell the people of Pakistan, and also to bring information back to the people of America, to say that we're all human beings and people are suffering from government decisions that seem to be beyond our control. And when I look at you here and I see that you're students in foreign relations, I'm thinking that someday that you'll have some influence in the government somewhere. And that's really important, or perhaps through business channels, or perhaps through education, in helping to expand the support network of people working together around the globe as supporters of peace. Because governments are about power, and power isn't a peaceful thing. But people want to live in peace everywhere. It's the same. And so the more that we share the truth, the less that our governments can confuse and lie to us. The more that we stand bravely for whatever we've seen, whatever it might be, whether or not anyone seems to be interested, that's our power. Because we're here and we can talk to in the issue of Aafia Siddiqui. Most Americans have no idea of her story, which perhaps I'm not going to use my time to tell you, but whatever you don't know, Fazia would be happy to fill you in. But what I do want to say is here's a horrific story. It's something very bad that happened. And the people aren't opposing it very strongly because they don't understand it. They don't really know what happened. They've heard, no power. There it is. Yeah, right. See? So power comes and goes, but we the people, in the end, I think we do have the power to stand together, though. We have to talk to one another, we have to tell the truth to one another, we have to respect one another's stories. And so that's why I came here. I came here to support Aafia's cause and to listen to her family and friends talk about her case. And when I go back to America, I will tell the stories I've heard. I came here to talk to the victims of the drone attacks when we have government people who want to use those drones to control a situation, to control what is to them a loud voice.
Yeah.
So anyway, we can. So I came here with the drones, and these governments, they're invested in the war. There's money to be made, there's power to be had, there's game to be played. But for the people, that's not how it is. And so I hope that as students of foreign relations, that when you get out there in the real world, they say, no, you can't say that. You can't say that. No, you can't do that. That will just be a problem. I hope that you'll do it anyway. You'll say it anyway. Because the more of us that do it, as Joe was saying, the safer it becomes to do it. The more you tell the truth, the more that becomes a story that everyone knows, and then it's not a problem. So I am very honored and proud to be speaking to you today, and I'm sure that you have many interesting questions, so I'm going to sit back down and see what happens next.
I would request Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, the sister of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, to come here and to share her views.
For having us here. It's an honor and it's a privilege, and I'm not going to, I'm here. Joe and Judy will be leaving tomorrow morning, and I think that I'm going to be short of time, and I'm going to give my time to the questions and answers that you would have. I think you all know Aafia's story. I'm available here for anything personal that you want to ask. I don't think there is anyone here that I need to brief about Aafia. I think the American perspective, for that we have Joe and Judy here. So I think I just want to thank you all for the time and for the invitation, which was a very sudden. I mean, this wasn't in our plan, so we also had some other plans, but for students and for them to find out what's going on, I think they're always.
Now we have a question and answer session. I would welcome your questions. You can direct your questions to any of the speakers, and most importantly the guests.
My name is Mohammed Abbas, and I am loudly MSc student. My question to Mr. Joe is said that 70% of US people against the Afghan war. Why didn't they protest? And now your presidential election is very near, and you people is if the people of US and are the sincere at that moment, and they could protest against drone attack and Aafia Siddiqui, because I think the US has a double standard, like drone attack and Aafia Siddiqui case. If we compare Lemon Davis, he shot it and he murdered a person, but Aafia Siddiqui is an innocent lady. What is your opinion? It is not justice, and it is not a double standard of US police.
We we try very hard to build more protest in the United States. The United States, though, is a very controlled society. The media, with all the discussion of freedom, is a controlled media. It's controlled in different kinds of ways. It's difficult to go into all the ins and outs of how the media puts across the same story and doesn't report what it doesn't want to report. So it doesn't report about Aafia Siddiqui, and the narrative that comes out on the drones is even different. So it takes a grassroots movement to counter what you hear and what comes up. The two parties in the elections, they're not going to talk about the drones, and they're not going to talk about Aafia Siddiqui, because they have the same position. Political parties generally represent social classes or social milieus, and they represent the same social class and milieu. The Occupy movement in the United States called it the 1%. And our Occupy, when we started occupying the hundreds of cities around the United States, starting with New York and Wall Street, we use the terminology that they are the 1% that control everything, and we are the 99%. That media is controlled by the 1%. The two parties represent the 1%. So as I go around and do political activity, if I go into a black community, for instance, in the United States, and knock on the door, and start talking to them about politics and the drones and the war and the attacks that are coming down on Muslims and other people and the austerity programs that are going on, and if I say to them, who are you going to vote for? Most of them will say, I'm not going to vote. And I will say, why? And they will say, because it doesn't make a difference. And they're right. So in the election, about 50% of the eligible voters won't vote. Of the other 50%, they will choose. They will say, I don't like either. But which one is a little bit better than the other? And they will vote for that person. So it's a very controlled electoral system. And you don't get other views into that electoral system.
I'm Dr. Aafia of Psychology, and thank you first of all for coming here, Dr. Lombardo and Ms. Judy. Thank you guys so much. We rarely get an opportunity to do something like this. But Dr. Lombardo, you said in Vietnam, 88% of the population opposed the war, and that's why the war stopped. I truly believe the 88% made the war stop. And then you said 70% don't believe that we should be fighting this war in Afghanistan. Well, if I believe the youth is fighting the American war. I mean, every soldier I think it's 75% soldiers are under 30 years of age. So with the holding that and knowing that, I mean, when you guys were young, you guys made a difference. You guys stopped the Vietnam War. What is the youth of today doing in America to stop something? I believe they're flying helicopters, and they are the ones that are bombing. The youth are the soldiers, and soldiers do agree with what they're doing is something right. If they agree with that, how can you have 70% of the population not agree with the war that's going on? And could you not do something like that again to stop it?
Speak to that question. Economic problems in the United States right now, and a large section, in fact, massive at this point, nothing I could have imagined during the Vietnam War, of young people who can't get a job and who have huge student loans as they went to school, and who are given no hope, basically, of economic well-being. Now, the Vietnam War was fought by a draft, so people were against their will, said, you go, you go, you go, you go, and then whether they wanted to or not, they just won. But now what's happening is that it's what we call a backdoor draft. People are going who think they have no other economic future.
They give you scholarships, they offer the army also, they offer cash, they give you house afterwards.
Well,
the U.S. Army doesn't work for people that join the army.
Well,
but as people, the people, like when you guys were young, you guys made a difference and change.
Yes,
you know?
and there are...
It doesn't want to change, or they're not interested in America. That's what I think.
Excuse me. So there's two aspects to that. One is that very few young people, very few, compared to the Vietnam War, the percentage of young people actually involved in soldiers is very small. So you don't have this massive reaction like everybody's best friend went to war. At the same time, we have So we have these two factors, but they're both very small percentages of the population. And the largest population affected are the black population. And those people were already in a war zone when they were at home. And I have gone in demonstrations where I went as George Bush in a Veterans Day March once. Nobody knew who I was. I had a mask on and a suit, and I had red paint spattered on my mask and my hat and my hands. And I was like waving like a float, like this, yeah. And when I was walking through the white neighborhood, people were cringing away from me. They wouldn't take a flower from my assistant. But when I got into the black neighborhood, where the people actually went and fought that war during the Iraq War, people were cheering me. And that's not me. They were cheering George Bush with blood on his hands. And I think you have to understand that the society is very complex and very different. In the 60s, we had so much hope. I can tell you, because I grew up then. But right now, Americans have very little hope. And that's why Occupy is the most important force for change. And that will grow more and more to oppose the war. Because young people think about things, and I think being many of you are young people, you know this is true, you think about things happening immediate to you first. What's happening to them immediately is that their dad lost his job. They have their school loans, and they didn't get a job. They're so-and-so. So the war isn't their first concern. But they'll get there, because the war is what's destroyed the whole